Hey, this is Jonathan Gilliam. Make sure you go check out all my books. Start with the best-selling Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival, and the 2 workbooks that are fillable that go right along with it, the Threat Assessment and Defense Assessment workbooks. Also, for your children, The Adventures of Team Little Bigs, a parent's book for children. Now, that's a book of pictures you give to your children, and you let them go through it, and in the pictures are lessons about security and awareness, and you, the parent, go over to teamlittlebigs.com and download the free lesson plans that go with each picture. All of this is a package that makes your life, your family more aware, safer, and able to look at yourself from the attacker's point of view. Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival. It's 2 accompanying workbooks, and The Adventures of Team Little Bigs, a parent's book for children, and the lesson plans that exist on teamlittlebigs.com. And now, let's start the show. This is Jonathan Gilliam back in on the Experts Podcast. Happy Monday. Let's see how crazy the world goes this week. It just doesn't get much crazier than it's been. And I'm wondering what's in store. We could have another virus. Who knows? I'm not saying that's in the news, but crazier things have happened. And I don't know. Every week it's something. But one thing that is definitely always there, that's been there, is something that's in the background that has completely fallen out of focus by the majority of people that stay abreast of anything at all of current events. And that's the fact that the same corrupt politicians are still in positions of authority. And they're not just corrupt. These are people that have clearly shown over the past, since February, when the rumors of the virus started, you started to see the reality of who these leaders are. Because typically what happens is that mayors aren't really recognized for the overwhelming impact they can have on people's lives. We focus on the president. Most people focus on the president. The president has become a celebrity. I mean, president elections, ever since TV came on board, president elections have been more of popularity contests. I mean, when Nixon and Kennedy debated, Nixon, those who listened to the radio, they said this was the first televised presidential debate ever. Most people that listened to the radio, almost 100% of them said that Nixon won the debate. But those that watched TV said that Kennedy clearly won it, that Nixon was sweating profusely, and he looked nervous. So it became an image that people were selling. I think we could see that with Barack Obama. It was an image. An image, though. They're going to put a man who's got dark skin. And again, if you listen to me and watch this podcast, you'll know there's nothing racist there's not a bone in my body that's racist. But Barack Obama was largely chosen by the Democrat Party because he has dark skin. I mean, when you look at it at the face value for what it really was and what he did for the country, he was not valuable whatsoever. In fact, the tensions between races in this country got unbelievably worse during his time. Nothing really changed. Of course, it never really changes from the presidential level. I mean, Barack Obama didn't choose a woman or a black person as his running mate. I don't know if anybody even realized that. They were so intrigued by the fact that he was the first black president. But he was really the first black president that didn't pick a woman or another black individual for his running mate. So that right there shows you that it really wasn't anything groundbreaking from the presidential level except for the color of somebody's skin. And you should realize this, no matter what color you are, what sex or gender, it doesn't matter if you got one leg or an extra leg, or you got no arms. The quality of your ability to lead has very little to do with your physical appearance. In fact, it really doesn't have anything to do with your physical appearance, except for that popularity contest that gets you elected. But when we look at mayors, when we look at governors, when we look at city council members, chiefs of police, sheriffs, school boards, principals, these are the people, superintendents of schools, these are the people that make enormous changes in your life, real changes that will affect you. You know, the taxes that you pay, one of the biggest gripes I hear, now am 50 years old and have plenty of friends who own properties, and the biggest complaint that I hear from them is that they have to pay these property taxes that are out of control. You know, on Long Island, the property taxes are extremely high. As much property taxes they pay, everything should be perfect. The education should be perfect. And for a perfect education to occur, that means that you leave politics. I mean, you're going to have to teach, should be U.S. history and world history, but they teach civics or socialism, basically is what it is, social studies. But your school, people should be coming out of school like experts in math, in reading, in writing. But it's not quite that way. For the amount of taxes that you pay, you think that they would be able to hire the best of the best teachers and have the program so structured that people come out so fundamentally like successful in those areas, those general basic areas of education. But that's not the case anywhere really. But I'm speaking of Long Island in New York because the taxes are so outrageous out here. And having lived in Manhattan, for 15 years, ridiculous. I'm from Arkansas. My mother lives in Arkansas, and I still part of my residence is still in Arkansas. And the taxes are way less, but the opportunity is not as great because it's just a much more rural area. Not as much going on there as Manhattan and New York in general. But it sucks that when you live here and you take advantage of all the opportunity, you end up living like you're in college if you live in Manhattan. And when you live in Long Island, you're married to your house. But all of that is determined by the city, not the president of the United States, not Congress. That's mandated, and those things are decided on by who you vote in your city governments. And I think that we've seen now the reality between small rural area leaders and these big city leftist politicians. And I think it's gone completely unnoticed by the majority of people. I mean, I think the people have seen it. Media, of course, is completely ignoring it, but because they understand, they are leftists by and large. I can't emphasize that enough. If you want a more detailed explanation of that, go listen to episode number 1 of the Experts podcast, and you'll understand exactly the reality of media. But by and large, a lot of people miss this. They get so spun up on who's the president that they don't realize that's just one aspect of governance. But we've seen through this virus, and we've seen not just a virus, but from the virus that occurred, the way it was locked down, the way that the unrest started to happen after George Floyd's death, and how they allowed the protests and yet still locked down. And it made me think, And I was walking today, going on a nice walk, did a little lifting, and had a nice dinner. Actually went to a restaurant and ate outside, which was very nice for the first time in literally since March. So that was nice. And I got to wear my cowboy boots, so that was good. But I was thinking tonight after eating and passing out afterwards, and for a little bit, I felt the exact same way after Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner, because I hadn't been to a restaurant in so long and just totally overate way too much. So as I'm walking, I'm thinking about this and about how we've been governed by mayors and governors and city councils, and the decisions that school boards have made about how they're going to do school, and the governors, about the reality of what the role of the president actually is, and the Senate and the Congress, and how relatively throughout this entire thing, I think it's, besides passing a stimulus check that gave people $1,200 at the most, which really didn't do a whole lot as far as for people who actually pay for rent or mortgage or taxes on their house. It really wasn't a lot. Groceries for a family, maybe for a month, maybe for 2 weeks if it's a big enough family. But what I started to see when I started to think about the leadership was that the president has been dragged into this stuff over and over and over. We had plenty of time to know that a virus was possible. When I say plenty of time, we could have seen what happened in 1918. From that point forward, the country should have been prepared for the next virus and constantly monitoring what works and what doesn't. But as I always say about these experts in the government, the real experts are on the ground. The real experts are the ones that spend, the majority of their years actually working in the field in which, they chose to go into to be a part of the action. Those are the real experts. Majority of people like that weirdo Phil Mudd from CNN, for instance, who within 10 years is in a management position, are typically not people that you want to rely on in a crisis situation. They're the last people. They may, work their way in and know budgets and know how to, personnel and man hours. They love to push that around, man hours, but they don't know anything when it comes to what actually goes on the ground. They may read information, they may get reports, and they may make decisions. If they're a good leader, they'll make good decisions based on surrounding themselves by these experts. But that typically is not what happens. But as I looked at this, I started to realize that the president keeps getting pulled into this again and again, whether it's the virus or the racial tensions or all these things. And, it's the president's job to calm the fears of the nation. Are we not adults anymore? Can we not rationally think and be critical thinkers? I guess not. Come to think of it, they never teach that in school. It's actually a course you can take in college, critical thinking. My mother's one of the most amazing critical thinkers I've ever met. She doesn't have a college degree. When we look at the mayor's and the governor's decisions, one of the reasons why they pull the president in, besides the political reasons, is because he's somebody that they can blame. And a lot of these people that are in a leadership position in the states they really don't know how to handle crisis. They inherit offices, or they are lifelong politicians, and the way it works is that it's done this way and it's always been done this way, and you step in there and you wrangle here and you wrangle there, and then when it's your time to go, relatively nothing changes. Unless it's somewhere like Detroit where they bankrupt the whole city. But by and large, most things don't change. They actually get a little bit worse with most of these leaders. And I'm talking about the city and the state leaders. So they use the president, and they use that emotion, that TV image of this powerful man, to bring him and to cast themselves into his light And it doesn't matter if it, in this case, if it was President Trump or Obama or anybody else, they utilize that light that has been cast upon the presidential figure, which I liken to when the Jews were being led through the desert by God himself and by Moses, that they longed for a king. And Moses went up on the mountain for 40 days to talk with God, came down with the 10 Commandments, and those people were already worshiping a golden calf that they had melted down gold and made themselves. That's how ridiculous people are. And they long for these leaders for some strange reason. And what's incredible about this country is that the founding fathers put into place a system where the people actually had power. And all these people that are criticizing the Constitution and they hate the United States and they're saying the United States is racist and this and that. The reality is that because of the Constitution, the world changed. It literally, the way it was formulated, the country and the world could not stay the way it was. And I hate to tell everybody this. I hate to be the bearer of bad news for everybody that wants to be a victim. But people with dark skin in the United States weren't the only people who were enslaved throughout history. Literally every color of human being, every religion has been enslaved at one point or another. That's just the way it was. And if people think because the Constitution was written the way it was, that they say, well, it was written as though, those who have dark skin were less of a human being. You look throughout history and you look at whoever was in power and whoever was enslaved, and they always thought, the people in power always thought that they were an evolved species. It's called ego, stupidity, and ungodliness. But that's the way it was. And it changed because of the Constitution that was written by our founding fathers. Like it or not, whether they were white or not, whether they believed that somebody with dark skin was a whole person or not, they wrote the Constitution in a way, because it was, I believe, in the way that they wrote it and stated it, it was ordained by God. And they wrote these words and it changed the world. It didn't happen immediately, but it did happen. Not just for people of color, but also for people of different genders, male and female. And it put people on an equal footing that had never been in history around the world. Yet people still cry out to this position of the president in the United States or in Canada, the prime minister, or wherever. And what they fail to realize is that the local and the state governments are the ones that actually do affect their lives on a daily basis. And that is where some of the worst leadership in the history of mankind exists. The only probably worse leadership than that would be those in Congress and in the Senate. But if you noticed through all this, besides approving a spending bill to give you some money for a little bit, the Senate and Congress have done nothing throughout all this. They've done nothing to it would have been better for them to just lay low than for Nancy Pelosi and all them to put on those scarves that they wore and kneel down on the ground. Most of them couldn't hardly get back up. Those types of things inflame the nation. That really does inflame, because it gets put on television, it gets broadcast out there, and it just inflames everything. Then again, even they turn around and grab hold of the spotlight of the position of the president to blame or to ride its coattail, make themselves look good by saying, I think we should call in the troops. Everybody's giving Tom Cotton all this praise for what he said. Tom Cotton, first of all, is not in the position to make that decision. And he's putting himself out there so he can run for president, I'm sure, 2024 is what he'll try to do. He's my mom's senator. But I don't think, why is Tom Cotton going out and writing an op-ed to the New York Post and then getting all this publicity when he should have been keeping a low profile and allowing the president to do his job and actually helping the president to do his job? But see, I don't get this with these people. Well, I mean, I do get it, but you would think if they were real leaders that they would be working much more in a much more professional manner. But regardless, the city governments and the state governments are ruining this country. It had not dawned on me, I will be honest with you, it had not dawned on me to the level that it is and the level of their incompetence until we hit a crisis. And now I should have realized this before with the school shootings. I think are a perfect example. If you really, really want to see the reality of failures from ground level PTA and school board members who are elected, city council people who are elected, mayors elected, and so on and so forth, state assemblies, state senators, state congressmen, the governors, and all their quote unquote experts, the law enforcement chiefs who are promoted because they're politically correct or connected, the sheriffs who are elected, the judges. None of those people have ever put into place an actual effective system to protect the schools from school shootings. Right now, somebody crazy could go, well, there's nobody at school, but let's say everybody went back to school. All this time that they've had massive amount of time. I have reached out to so many people trying to tell them that we can take, simple as this, Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival. That's my book. You hear the commercial at the beginning of the show. And it's workbooks. And I could take, 3 people, 4 people from every school. They could read the book, and then I could guide them via the FaceTime or Skype on how to do the threat assessment themselves and come up with their own defenses for these schools. Nobody's interested because the failures at the ground level, the city level, the state level are so egregious that they won't even do what's effective to protect children because they either don't want to spend the money, they just don't think it's ever going to happen there. And they won't put out any money at all to do the proper threat assessments. And when they actually do, they make the same mistake. They hire people who have been in law enforcement who've never been an attacker. They don't hire people that come in and say, I would murder this many people in this area. I would come in at this time. I see that you have this vulnerability and I can exploit that here and here. And this is where I would. They don't hire people that know that have actually done that for a living. They won't do that. They'll hire somebody. I've seen firefighters doing threat assessments for school shootings. What? Stay in your aisle. But this is a perfect example of the failure at the ground level. Your children are not safe in school, not because it's impossible to keep them safe, but because of the stupidity and incompetence at these lower levels of leadership. I can guarantee you 100%, if I did a threat assessment on a school and we use whatever their budget is to come up with mitigations of the vulnerabilities and different plans of action with the money that they have, we could find ways to secure the school that there would never be another attack inside the school. There could be attacks outside. There could still be attacks outside, but even those could be mitigated. But I could guarantee you that they would never get into the school to attack again. But they're not really They don't think it's going to happen there, so they don't make the correct decisions because they're incompetent in their positions. And when you look at so now that I've given you that understanding, you take that incompetence and you look at how cities and states have handled the coronavirus. And yes, it's real. Okay, it's real. I know because I had it. And so those of you that are out there saying that it's no worse than the flu, you don't know what you're talking about if you didn't have it. But the way this was handled, I did it when I had it, and I sat here all the month of April with this virus. I watched a lot of television, did a lot of research. I didn't do any podcasts because, quite frankly, I didn't know if I was going to live. Once it started hitting my lungs, it was a scary thing. I was talking to all the doctors that I know, and they had patients come in talking to them because they had, they were starting to develop a cough, and they had fever, and they would go to the emergency room, sitting up talking, and then dead within a couple days, or on a ventilator and then dead in a week. So it was scary. But I had a lot of time to watch television and do some research. And when I started looking at the 1918 Spanish flu, one thing that I realized is that there were several places where they really did lock down. Some places it worked. Other places, the mailman went through in a town and gave everybody the virus, even though they wouldn't let anybody stop in the town. People were wearing masks all over the place. They understood. One woman or one kid was now an adult, I should say, an elderly individual who was a child at the time in 1918, said that there were so many people dying that they had the coffins that were just made out of regular wood. I mean, they didn't have any, it was just too many people. They didn't have nice coffins, just had, a box basically. And they had them stacked up outside of the funeral home. And this one guy was talking about how him and a bunch of other kids went and were jumping on the boxes and playing and stuff. And then they went home, and that was like on a Friday. And within a week, none of those kids, except for one or two, were still alive. It was bad. But I started realizing that there's only so much you can do. There's only so much you can do when one of these viruses come around. And the way it's been handled has been completely incorrect. And, to be honest with you, the president, and again, it wouldn't matter if it's President Trump or anybody else, the position of the president is really the last line of defense when it comes to this. And you can see this in the states and the cities. Those are the people that made the ultimate decision on how long to lock down, to give it a try. And there are many places that did give it a try. Many places are just rural. I love the way some of these places where there's literally nobody in their states compared to somewhere like New York, where New York City has more of a population in a 40 square mile area than some of the states have in the entire state. And the state governors are bragging because it didn't happen in our state because we took the right precautions. I mean, they took precautions. They didn't do anything extra that anybody else didn't do. It's just they don't have the people in their state. And once it shut down, they didn't have the interstate traffic coming through their state to bring the virus there. Planes, people weren't flying, so it just stopped. And it's a rural area, so people didn't get it. I can guarantee you, South Dakota, if you sent a dozen people that were highly infected around South Dakota, they would get infected, even if it was shut down. If you got to go to you could send them to the grocery stores, and within a week, back when it was somehow contagious, that's a whole nother story. People would have gotten it. But, I'm very, side note here, I'm very weirded out by the fact that this was so bad and then it was nothing. Like, you can protest all you want, but nobody gets it. Because we're not having the spikes that we did. And I do think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that these criminal governors, these dopey, idiotic, incompetent governors put people in that were positive into nursing homes and killed over 50,000 people in the country. That's how many people have died from their mistakes. So, but getting back to this, one thing I learned from looking at this stuff, these different documentaries on these viruses and things like that, one, the experts are only as good as what they know now. And in 1918, they didn't have enough knowledge then to actually protect people or come up with a cure or a vaccine or any of this stuff. So they had to just ride it out. And now they were smart enough to wear masks, and but I don't know how effective it was back then. So I started to realize that there's only so much you can do. And to a point, there's only so much of power that you can exert on the American public, because we are a free nation. We don't have dictators here. And what these governors and mayors don't understand, and city council people and whoever approves this stuff, is that their position is a privilege of our choice to put them there. And that this is in a perfect world. They say, I have the ability to do this better than that person. And so the people decide, okay, we're going to allow you to stay in office for this period of time, and let's see what you can do. We'll give you the chance. But that does not mean absolute power. That is the reality of the world. And what has happened with Cuomo and de Blasio are two of the biggest perfect examples out there. I mean, Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan is an idiot, and she's a leftist as far as they go, and totally incompetent, should never be in a position of power. That woman shouldn't even be picking up garbage off the side of the road for the city. She's that bad. She would screw that up. But the level of narcissistic incompetence in the New York City Mayor de Blasio and New York State Governor Cuomo is, I think, unrivaled by anyone else. There's a lot of other stupid people, a lot of other incompetent, far left, which really does border into criminal. But what you see in Cuomo and de Blasio is complete ego, narcissistic ego, and truly believing what they're doing is the right thing, or not having a care that, and knowing that they're going to put people at risk and potentially kill thousands and thousands of people and still do it. Cuomo did it with the elderly in the retirement homes, killing over 10,000 elderly here in this state. And remember, folks, there wasn't 10,000. It wasn't that the 10,000 COVID patients that were sent to the nursing homes died in the nursing homes. It could have been one in a nursing home and infected a massive amount of people. It wasn't a massive amount of people positive sent to these nursing homes. And I don't know what the numbers are, but it wasn't as massive as the numbers of people that died from a COVID positive person being in the nursing home. All the while, they had, in Stony Brook University, spent $150 million. Tell me that wasn't a payoff to somebody that's connected to the governor and the mayor and the school system. That was so that they could push $150 million into whoever built that and whoever responsible for that. They basically gave them $150 million. They built a gigantic temporary hospital. The Javits Center was the same way. They had the U.S. ship out here it was either Mercy or Comfort. I don't remember which one was here in the Hudson River. They didn't send any elderly people to them. And in fact, I don't know about the ship, but I don't think the Javits, and I know that Stony Brook had no one. They didn't even have anybody come there. No patients whatsoever. They remained empty, and they still made the decision to send the COVID patients into the nursing home where they knew the most vulnerable people were. That is either pure narcissistic egotistical decisions by Cuomo, or he knew that they were going to die, all these elderly, and he wanted to get rid of them for whatever reason. You could think about it could be because they saved $1 billion a year in Medicaid, because the state pays Medicaid, part of Medicaid or all of it. I don't know. But we figured up the numbers, and it was over $1 billion that they're going to save now because these people died. Could have been that. But I find it hard to believe that he didn't realize that these places were empty and he was sending COVID positive people into a population that was the most vulnerable. But you see, that's that total incompetence that I was talking about with the schools and hardening the schools so that they don't have any more school shootings. It's the same, except on the case of these governors and mayors, they truly believe that their power is absolute. And it is not absolute. We do not live in a dictatorship. And if they were true leaders, what they would say is that they have, or their power goes as far as to, can we figure out what the best thing is that we can do for the people? And once we have that figured out, at least to the best of our ability, we should now tell the people that this is what we think we should do. And we want to maintain, a distance from people. We want you to stay home for this period of time, and let's see if we can flatten the curve, as they say. But then, and this is how I know that their decisions were completely either egotistical, narcissistic, ego-driven, or incompetent. Because when these riots and these protests broke out, they just allowed them to happen. And in fact, they made excuses for them in many cases as to why they were just going to let them populate the air because of their freedom of speech. And they suggested that they wear masks. But now Cuomo is actually saying that if people don't start adhering to what he is mandated, that he is going to go back to the regulations before, even though they have seen no spike in New York City. In fact, it's the lowest hospitalization number since the virus began. He is saying that he may go back and re-mandate that everybody stay at home, all places be closed, and so on and so forth. It makes no sense whatsoever. That is somebody who is drunk on power and dangerous. All the while he and de Blasio keep fighting back and forth. This is something like you would have seen during the Roman Empire and Caesar. It's that type of madness. So this is what people are missing because of these riots and these protests in Atlanta. They have this guy. I'm not going to say his name. I'm not going to go into that detail because I don't want to listen, I'll be honest. I'm not going to give him any glory as though he was a martyr. They burnt down the Wendy's where he was shot. This guy is sleeping in his car, blocking the drive. They kept saying the drive-thru, but I didn't see it blocking the drive-thru. It was blocking the parking lot where people were driving by because he fell asleep in his car because he's drunk. The cops show up. If you watch the body camera of the police officers, they went above and beyond as far as being super cool. Everything they did was by the book, the way it should be done. They didn't escalate the situation. They talked nicely to the guy. They treated him with total respect. He blew into a breathalyzer and he was drunk. And when they went to cuff him, he just went ballistic, grabbed one of the cops' tasers, which you have to remember, a taser is a deadly weapon. It may be a less than lethal weapon, but if you shoot somebody, Dan Bongino was talking about how if you shoot a cop in the face with it can kill them. It can. Or another civilian that's in the parking lot. Nobody knows what this guy's going to do. Once somebody escalates to that level, the level of force that you can use is what is needed in order to stop that person from any further escalation of force. He'd already reached the level because he grabbed the weapon that has a potential of seriously injuring or killing somebody. And remember, it could be an imminent threat of serious bodily injury or loss of life. And that's what the law says. And you don't want it any other way, folks. Trust me on that. You don't want cops saying, well, I can't shoot him now because he's only going to hurt somebody, so I better go over there and get into a tussle with him. You don't want that, because that is how people will get killed. Greater numbers than they are now. You don't want people fighting with cops and then getting off in the court system, because that will escalate to the point where the people will break into your homes, and when the cops get there, they'll fight with them and then just walk away. But this guy, he grabs a taser from one of the cops, which, whatever, I don't know how that happened, but they're like in freaking full wrestling mode at this point. He gets up, takes off running, and the video clearly shows he turns around and shoots the taser at an officer, and the officer shoots him with a gun and kills him. And of course, the autopsy comes because the guy's twisting. He shoots the taser. There's a bit of a fraction of a pause. As he turns, he gets shot in the back. I'm sure it was probably the back side, or, but it was towards the back of the person, which I'm going to tell you is not against the law. You can, if you're a felony fleeing, an armed or dangerous felon who just committed a felony, and you are a threat to the public at large, you can be shot in the back. And it's not like you've been taught in the Wild West shooting a man in the back is not a dishonorable thing. If it is a felon who could hurt or kill a member of the public or another cop or you can shoot them in the back while they're running. If they're running to gain a position of cover, or they're running into an area where people are at, you can shoot them in the back. Now, I looked at that video, and by the time it was finished, I was like, okay, good shoot. The guy's a dumbass who decided to fight the cops and grab one of their tasers and tried to shoot him with it, and he got shot. No, not according to Atlanta. They fire the guy, put the other guy on a desk job. The medical examiner does it and says it's a homicide because he shot him in the back, when you can clearly see what happened on the video. The chief of police, who is worthless as far as I could tell anyway, quits, and doesn't just quit. She's going to take another job in the city government, right? So she can get her retirement. And the mayor, who wants to be, again, jumping on the light of the potential presidency of Joe Biden, because she's on the short list he chooses some idiots for his list. I mean, he's an idiot anyway, but she's on the short list to potentially be the vice president. And this is a person who's trying to be the vice president, and she fires the cop and then states that the information was not in there, that it might have been a good shoot, but we can't have this happening. I mean, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But again, this is the incompetence level that you're seeing at the city and state level. Now, I hope you're starting to get a picture here, because it's not, the presidency makes big decisions. They can put us in war. They can keep us out of war. They can make broad strokes of an executive order that will change a lot of things. But by and large, the majority of things that happen, and the way these crises occur and they're not handled properly, does not come from the president. The majority of problems that you have in your day-to-day life are affected or come from the bad decisions of state and city officials that believe they are all powerful. And most of them are so incompetent they should not be in their job at all. But see, when it comes to, for instance, the lockdown, things like this, in a crisis situation, it should be handled similar to the way Florida and the Gulf Coast handles hurricanes. Mandatory evacuation. But if you stay in your home, you're on your own. It's your decision. They're mandating that everybody leaves, but they don't go in and force people out of their homes that want to stay. Because ultimately, I mean, when it comes to natural disasters and this type of crisis, there's only so much that the government is capable of doing by the way our government is structured, period. But they overreach, and nobody does anything about it. George Floyd gets killed. You know, I was thinking about going into this, but I'm not going to go in this tonight. But Dave Chappelle did a whole 20-something minute thing about this. And the first thing he says at the very beginning was that he was bagging on Don Lemon, which good for him on that. He's clearly no fan of Candace Owens or Laura Ingraham as well. I mean, the people he kept pointing out besides Don Lemon were all conservative and had said stupid things. I'll give him that. But where he goes into the reality of all this stuff, he makes martyrs out of people who were murderers. And George Floyd's death, I feel exactly, he described it perfectly. But then he goes into this other rant that justifies the violence and the crime. Totally opposite of where a rational, not high person would go. But people get chips on their shoulders. And then they buy into these idiotic celebrities. They buy into what the race baiters say. They buy into what the city leaders or the state leaders and sometimes the federal leaders say. They buy into it. And all the while, what they're not realizing is that it's a game for them. When they're not flexing and overreaching with their power, they're playing a game to make you believe that they have your best interest at heart. But they don't know how to lead. It's clearly evident when it comes to real crisis. And I think George Floyd was murdered. It's terrible that what happened. But what is happening since then doesn't do anything to fix the real problem, which is the inner city and the crime level there. It does nothing to stop the reality of, they all say that these lives matter. This life matters, that life matters. Last year, 9 black men were shot unarmed by police officers. There were thousands shot and killed in black on black crime. You don't hear any of these celebrities, none of them, talking about that. Not one. You know, Ron Perlman, I just tweeted something out there a little while ago. That he's the guy that played Hellboy, and the first one sucked. He's the guy that played in Sons of Anarchy. He's not a great actor, one of the ugliest people in Hollywood. And he comes out and he's going against Ted Cruz. Like he wanted to jump on there and virtual signal like all these other Hollywood people, even though, you know, he's trying to act tough and saying that he'll wrestle Ted Cruz or fight Ted Cruz and then donate $50,000 to Black Lives Matter. What is that going to do? Why doesn't he just shut his mouth and go find a kid of every race and give them money to go to college? But that's not what these people do. They play the game, and it doesn't matter if it's a celebrity in Hollywood or if it is one of these politicians at the state and city level, and the same thing with the federal government, but the state and the city level where they really do affect your life. When they're not overreaching, as in the case of this virus, they are flexing their muscles in a way that it's a game to get you emotionally under their hand so that when a crisis occurs, they use it to flex their muscles. I mean, the Democrats have said this before. Never let a good crisis go to waste. That's not a real leader. But you see, Politicians are not real leaders. They are scammers. They are scam artists. There are very few leaders that are in politics. A well-rounded, that's the thing about our founding fathers, is that they were well-rounded individuals. And you look through history, especially the history of the United States. If race is your thing and that's what you're concerned about, then you look through history and you look at the people who made the real change. They were well-rounded individuals. They were not race baiters who that's all they ever did. These are individuals who had real careers, who when they spoke were eloquent because they were educated. Or maybe they weren't educated formally, but they grew up in families with parents who raised them with morals and ethics. And they spoke like that. You will not find scammers throughout history that made real differences. And those people, by and large, do not exist in politics. There are a few. But by and large, they do not exist because they play the political game. The reality is that those that affect your life the most in politics are not the president and the senators and the congressmen in D.C. It's your city governments and your state governments. Most of the incompetent decisions that don't protect your schools or don't give a good education to your children, most of the incompetent decisions to lock you down over the past month, most of the incompetent decisions not to train police properly or clean up the inner city so you don't have these problems come from your state and local city governments. If they're not overreaching in their power, then they're trying to divide you emotionally so that they can get you under their grip, all the while failing in their jobs to handle crisis. I'm Jonathan Gilliam. This is The Experts. The truth has arrived. Peace, and we're out of here.